The other one that I'm looking at is you know, it's been called the People's Main Event. I'm talking about Michael Chandler against the returning Tony Ferguson. Now, this one is going to be super fun because, look, I, like many others, I'm just dying to see Tony Ferguson back in there. I think that I've gone back and forth on this because I'm not going to backtrack completely on what I've said. I do think that you have to remember when people were so surprised that Justin Gaethje beat him. That was one of the rare picks that I got absolutely spot on because I believe Gaethje was an underdog going into that fight. I believe because one of my friends actually said that he thought that Tony was going to absolutely murder him. I was like, no, I just don't see it. I think that, you know, Gaethje's going to just piece him up because I think that Tony's just far too hittable. And I maintain that. I do stand by that because when you look at a lot of Tony's fights, especially in like the fights running up to the Gaethje contest, he tends to get hit quite a lot. Even the ones where he won, do you know what I mean? The one against Pettis, you know, he got knocked down like twice in that fight and then knocked Pettis down. Then Pettis had to retire with a broken hand. That fight was not like a domination victory. Do you know what I mean? He was getting caught all the time in that fight. And that is part of Tony. Tony is part of what we love about him, is part of what we hate about. Well, part of what we love about him is that the fights are always exciting. But it's frustrating sometimes when you watch him put himself into positions where he's just getting hurt. Now, I do like that he's taken a year off here. He's taken an entire year, a year and a half actually, I think, since the Charles Oliveira fight, where Charles, quite frankly, just dominated him. Some of the angles that his limbs were at were just quite frankly disgusting. And but he managed to hold out. You know, he managed to tough out to a decision, and I don't think he gets enough credit for that, because you've got a guy in Charles Oliveira who has the most submissions in the history of the UFC, and he had Tony in basically submission positions for the entire fight and wasn't able to submit Tony Ferguson. Now, there has to be some credit for that, because I know Tony Ferguson in the press conference, he seemed to be very upset with Joe Rogan and the commentary team for making it sound like he was a dummy and didn't know what he was doing on the ground, because he was just getting absolutely outclassed by Charles Oliveira. But we've got to remember, Oliveira was not able to get that submission, and the fact that Tony was able to resist that for the entire length of the fight kind of shows that, you know, shows something. And I don't think the commentators were being disrespectful to Tony, not intentionally anyway. I know that he seems to have taken it that way, but that's part of the thing about Tony. He seems to have a chip on his shoulder about an awful lot of things. Now the fighter pay thing's coming in, because obviously, you know, the deal is always good enough until it ain't, isn't it? That's one thing that I've been taking away from a lot of these, the fighters that have been coming out and going against Dana White, is that, you know, the deal was good enough when you signed it, but now you're thinking it's not good enough. So it's, yeah, I don't know. I'm not going to get into the pay debate, not on here, because we've got too much fight to talk about. But I do like that Tony's taken a year and a half off. I'm not sure I completely like where his head's at. He seemed to have a little bit of a chip on his shoulder. Seemed like he was kind of almost like kind of angry. Like he's talking about, you know, how he didn't like the fact that Michael Chandler jumped the line at lightweight. So, well, what did you want him to do, mate? I mean, you decided to take some time off, rightfully so. That was the correct thing to do. But then, you know, Michael Chandler comes in and knocks out Dan Hooker in spectacular fashion after being Bellator champion for a very long time. What do you want him to do, mate? The division, what, do you want him to just keep everything on ice until you were ready to come back and fight again? The division has to move on, and you weren't even the champion. You can't hold up the division. Do you know what I mean? Like, what did you expect the UFC to do? I don't know what else you want them to do other than, yeah, you put Michael Chandler in that title fight. You know, and then, you know, obviously Chandler's come off a couple of losses here, and this is where I find this one interesting, because look, it wasn't that long ago that it was about 6 months or so that Michael Chandler was in that fight against Justin Gaethje, and he got really battered in that fight. Both of them, you know, dished out some punishment, but definitely, you know, Michael Chandler was on the receiving end of more punishment in that fight than Gaethje, and that was a real tough fight. It was only 6 months ago, right? Tony Ferguson took that nasty beating off of Justin Gaethje, but you also got to remember that, whilst it was one-way traffic and towards the end, that Gaethje-Ferguson fight was tough to watch, you've got to remember that actually, Ferguson did catch Gaethje, like at the end of round 2, I think it was. I haven't rewatched the fight recently, so I do apologise if I've gotten that wrong, but it was definitely near the end of one of the rounds. I believe it was round 2. Ferguson just caught Gaethje with this wonderful uppercut and floored him, and had there been more time left in the round, there may have been an opportunity for Tony Ferguson to get the finish there. So, what I would say is that whilst Tony Ferguson, yes, he got outclassed by Justin Gaethje and he took a real beating. That was quite a long time ago now. He's had time to recover. He then had that fight against Oliveira, and it's not like he took like a concussive beating in that fight. He just got out-grappled on the floor. And, despite his best efforts, Oliveira couldn't quite get that submission. Now, I just think that because of the time off, Tony's going to be in a much better place, because he didn't get knocked out against Gaethje, but he did take a lot of concussive shots, and I will concede that. But he didn't get knocked down. He didn't get knocked out. Whereas, Michael Chandler, he didn't get knocked out against Gaethje, but he did take a hell of a beating. And it was far more recently. And look, I quite like Tony in this fight, purely because he's coming in as a pretty sizable underdog. So I am going with Tony, because I just feel like actually he has more ways to win it. Because, like Chandler, he would love to shoot him for a double leg, but then you've got to be really careful, because Tony has Darce chokes from positions. He's got positions for Darce chokes that you don't even know about. You know what I mean? He just pulls them out from thin air, which is wonderful. I do feel like Tony Ferguson has more ways to win this fight than Michael Chandler does. Michael Chandler effectively has kind of one main way that he's going to win this fight. And it's a good way, don't get me wrong, because it's that big overhand right. That same one that he caught, I think it was AJ, was it Pitbull he fought in Bellator? Where he hit him with that overhand right. It was just because with Chandler, one of the things about him that's interesting, that kind of allows him to throw that overhand right and land it, is because people think he's shooting him for a double leg. Because actually, he sits about the same kind of height, whether he's shooting in, because he can drop down and either shoot in for those legs, or he can drop down and then power from a leg, spring up and throw that overhand right. And so you think he's going takedown, your hands go down there, but that's not where your hands need to be. Bang! You're taking that overhand right, it's done. Because that's one thing that Michael Chandler has. He has one punch knockout power. Ridiculous power. The guy's built like a tank, right? And that presents a problem because Tony, as I mentioned before, is very hittable. So, look, would it surprise me to see Michael Chandler get the knockout? No. But to summarise, I think that Tony Ferguson, he's taken a break. He's going to come back looking better. I just feel like on the feet, Tony Ferguson attacks from some real crazy angles. Yes, he does get hit, but he's not easy to knock out. Chandler will need all of that power in order to separate Tony from his senses completely. And I feel like if Chandler, gets frustrated on the feet and shoots him for a takedown, or even if Tony gets the takedown, gets it to the floor, I think Tony is going to have a real advantage there, a real advantage. And the submission is quite frankly disrespectful in favour of Tony, considering how good he is at Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu and the Darce chokes, just the innovative ways that he can find those submissions. And he's got innovative striking as well, don't get me wrong, but the innovations in the grappling are really something to behold. With that being said, 14-1 on the submission for Tony Ferguson is quite frankly disrespectful, and I want to have a go on that, because you know what? I think Tony Ferguson has a much better chance than 14-1 to submit Michael Chandler. I'm not saying it's definitely going to happen, but for me, that is a value bet if I've ever seen one. 14-1 on Tony Ferguson to get the submission. Let's go. Side note, I would say he's 3-1 just to get the win. That's also a bet well worth putting on, in my opinion. I don't think that Tony is completely done yet. I feel like the losses that he had, whilst they were, the Charles one was one-sided, but there are things you can take away from it, as I mentioned. But yeah,